The World Rapid and Blitz Championship starts on the 26th of December in Warsaw, and all of the big guns are in action. So we've got Magnus Carlsen, world number 1 and reigning world champion, Hikaru Nakamura, absolute Blitz beast, and Alireza Firouzja, world number 2 and 18-year-old superstar. So it's going to be a really exciting tournament, and I want to look back at some of the best games that these guys have played in recent times in the build-up to the tournament. So I'm starting today with Firouzja versus Naka. Firouzja had white here, and this was played in November 20 on chess.com in a Blitz match. This game's insane, only 18 moves, and wait till you see the result of it. Really fun to watch. So Firouzja goes e4, and we have this Vienna game on the board, slightly more unusual at the top level. Now bishop c4 and bishop c5 from Naka. You can go knight f6 there, which is arguably more solid, but we have bishop c5. But now this walks into some fun. So queen to g4, instantly going on the attack, attacking this weak g7 pawn. And the more solid ways to play for black would be something like king f8 to defend this pawn. Looks a bit weird, but you'll soon be picking up a tempo on the queen. So white usually goes queen f3 there, threatening checkmate. Then you'd have, say, knight f6, knight ge2 to hold the d4 square. And white's a bit better, but it's not too much. But instead of this, Naka actually plays an inferior move, queen to f6. Because this walks straight into a very strong reply from white, which is knight to d5. So yes, you leave this pawn on prise, which now gets taken, but after king d1, black's already in some trouble. So we note that this bishop holds the f1 square, so there's no checkmate here. And in the meantime, black has to deal with this threat here, and the g7 pawn is hanging. So how do you do this? Well, king f8 makes the most sense, best move. You hold this pawn, you get away from the check here. And now Firouzja responds with knight h3. Again, the best move. You don't really want to waste time taking this. Instead, he develops, hits the queen, and opens up the rook to come to the f-file. And now Naka missteps again. So he should go pawn to h5 here, with the idea being that you pick up an important tempo on the queen. The best move here would be queen g5, and now after queen to d4, which was played in the game, you can play pawn to d3 as white to hold the bishop, and then black gets bishop e7 in, an important tempo being picked up on the queen. And the whole point of this weird retreating bishop move is that you give the queen some escape room here on c5, and then maybe this way or this way. With the way the game played out, if we just come back here, because Naka didn't play h5 and the queen stayed on g4, now when he plays queen d4, his queen's actually trapped. So pawn to d3 here holds the bishop, holds the pawn, and we can see this queen actually has nowhere to go. White just needs one move to play pawn to c3 here, and that queen's a goner. So Naka now played pawn to d6. Looks great to pick up that tempo on the queen, but actually it's not the best move. Again, he should have tried something like, say, pawn to h5, and after, say, queen to g3, then bishop to e7, giving that queen some room. But he didn't go in for this. He played pawn to d6, and now Firouzja missteps by playing queen to f3 here. Best would have been queen to g3, not stepping onto this diagonal, and then black's in some trouble with this queen once again. So say bishop takes on h3, just trying to give the queen this f2 square once the knight is gone. Well, now you can even play rook to f1 immediately as a very strong move, but say white takes, now black comes in here, the only way to help the queen escape. And you can actually just go bishop to d2 here. The rook is coming to the f-file. This is just awful for black, as we can see. But instead of this, Firouzja plays queen to f3, and this is slightly different now, because now when Naka does play h5, there's a big threat here of bishop to g4 skewering the queen, and you have to do something about that. So Firouzja now goes knight to e3 to parry this threat, and he also opens up a checkmating threat here on f7. So that's why Naka goes knight to f6 to block that. And now again Firouzja missteps with knight to g5. That knight was actually doing a really valuable job here, holding this f2 square, so that if this knight ever moves on e3, then the queen doesn't have this square available at the end of the lines. So a better move here would have been something like queen to f1, just renewing this threat of pawn to c3, because now if you do something like bishop to g4, we can just take that, pawn recaptures, pawn to c3, and the queen is getting trapped. But coming back here, Firouzja goes knight into g5, and now we had bishop to g4, and this variation is very different because after captures, which is basically forced, pawn captures, the queen drops away now, and this time the black queen isn't getting trapped. We had pawn to g3 now from Naka, great move, because now if you go pawn to c3, we have queen to f2, and that queen is now scurrying away. So instead after g3, we had knight takes on f7 here. Again, not the best move. Better would have been, say, taking with the bishop, because now you open up this threat of knight e6 check, hitting these two pieces. But I can see why Firouzja went for this. This is Blitz. You hit the rook, which is eyeing this pawn, but it runs into a really powerful reply now. Rook takes on h2, and white's in all sorts of trouble. You can't take this, or after recaptures, that pawn is going through in combination with the queen, and it just can't be stopped. So instead, Firouzja tried moving the rook away here. He played rook to f1, but now we had a brilliant finishing move. If you want to pause and look for it, Naka played queen to f2 here. Great move, just giving the queen, because after rook takes, pawn takes, queen f1 to stop that pawn, we now had knight h5, and there's nothing that white can actually do to stop this threat of knight g3 and then queening the pawn. Firouzja desperately chucked a pawn with d4, the bishop took, and here Firouzja actually resigned. So a really fun back and forth game there between these two players. If you enjoyed this and want to see more like this, then hit here to subscribe, and see another amazing Firouzja game, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.